Big deal for the families involved. It's a big deal for the city. It's a big deal for the police department. And but it takes time to garner facts and information. And I would rather err on the side of caution rather than to haphazardly give information only to have to retract it. On March the 7th, 2023, at approximately 6:11 a.m., the Mobile Police Department, along with the SWAT team, executed a search warrant at 856 Charles Street in Mobile, Alabama. That search warrant was predicated upon a robbery investigation that occurred back in February. During that investigation, two individuals were identified as perpetrating the armed robbery, and that was one, Mr. Jason Jones, two, Mr. Christopher Kennedy. Mr. Jason Jones resides at 856 Charles Street, which is subsequently where we obtained the correct warrant for that location. Mr. Jason Jones is also the brother of the deceased Mr. Cordell Jones. It would suffice as to say that the Mobile Police Department executed the search warrant by using the SWAT team, in which case they breached the front and the side door. The front door was breached using what's called an energized breach method, which explains the boom that a lot of people in the neighborhood heard. That boom is designed to remove the door from its hinges, and subsequently, once the breach was completed, the SWAT team went in, announced their presence on the outside of the residence, never going in, and when doing so, immediately sounded the sirens to the vehicle to put everybody in the house on notice, and certainly everyone in the neighborhood. In addition to that, they also got on the loud PA system of the armored vehicle and announced their presence, the Mobile Police Department, that they were there for a search warrant, and they gave specific instructions for the occupants of the residence to exit the residence. Some 23 seconds after breaching the door, Mr. Cordell Jones, unfortunately, being nude, armed himself with an AR pistol weapon, which certainly could be construed as an assault rifle. He leaped from a rear window where he encountered a patrol officer, or a SWAT officer rather, and that officer conducted deadly force. Mr. Jones unfortunately succumbed to his injuries while on the scene. Mr. Jones was carried by SWAT officers, who also in attendance was a SWAT medic who was trained to deal with trauma. Mr. Jones was treated on the scene, but certainly members of the SWAT team had to carry Mr. Jones to the nearest intersection of Shawnee Street and Charles Street. And that was because there were still multiple people inside the residence. The scene was not secure, and we wanted to ensure that Mr. Jones received the treatment that he deserved to get. And so we brought him closer to an intersection while waiting on the paramedics to get there. The SWAT officer that is trained to be a paramedic implemented life-saving strategies such as CPR and applying tourniquets, but unfortunately, Mr. Jones still died from his injuries. I would like to say that all of this started simply with Jason Jones. Jason Jones was being investigated as a part of an armed robbery. He was also a person of interest in reference to a homicide investigation that occurred on Orange Street back in February. And he has known affiliations with a local gang faction that has a propensity and has shown to be very violent over the last year and a half or so. When the investigators seeked out the search warrant, a threat assessment was made. That threat assessment was given to the SWAT commander to determine the best approach and tactic that would be used to go to that residence. I think it is important to note, had Jason Jones not been involved in criminal activity, the Mobile Police Department wouldn't be standing here before you today. I think it's understandable that the community is hurting. We have offered certainly our condolences to the family. Listen, this is tragic. And as I've said before, we don't take lightly any time there's death in our community. It doesn't matter if it's at the hands of a criminal or the unfortunate incident with the hands of a police officer. This is a stain on our community. This is what we've been battling this entire time. There is nothing I can say today that would mitigate, resolve, or make right to the family. I understand they're upset. They have a right to be upset. And there is nothing I can say today that will bring comfort to them, other than I am personally praying for their family. Listen, I have children of my own. God forbid, I have no idea what the family is dealing with today. But I do know that we are suffering as a community. We are suffering as a police department, right along with them. And with that said, I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah, I was unclear that you said that the decedent had a gun, an airsoft gun. It's unclear. Did he point it at officers, and did the officers give him verbal commands to drop
So,
or anything like that?
right, we're not going to get into the specifics of what was done. I think it would suffice to say that Mr. Jones leaped from a rear window nude, armed with an assault-type weapon.
Are you able to show us a picture of the body camera footage of that?
I am not prepared to do that today.
Can you tell us what prompted the officer to fire on the seatbelt?
Well, anytime an officer or anybody that defends themselves is faced with imminent danger or threats of a fatality or death, that in itself is probable cause to use deadly force.
You said you weren't able to show it, you were ready to show it today. Is there a time when you
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You said you weren't ready to show that today, to show that Cordell was armed with a weapon.
Yeah, we won't be showing any material evidence from the body-worn camera. I think it would be wise to go ahead and tell that we have already submitted all related videos to this incident to the District Attorney's Office. It was done the afternoon of March 7th, and I did that as a matter of transparency for the community to know that we are cooperating fully, certainly with our own investigation and with the investigation that the District Attorney's Office may conduct themselves.
So that means it'll be the district attorney's decision on when and whether to release the footage?
So, there will be a time and place for that, okay? I think it would suffice to say that, listen, we have a family grieving today the loss of a child, Mr. Cordell Jones. Let me add, Mr. Cordell Jones was not the target of this investigation at all. It was his brother Jason Jones who was the criminal we were looking for. And this is why it's important for families to understand that what your family members do matter. And you've heard me say, when you hear something, you see something, say something, because it may be the very thing that saved your loved one's life.
And you said that Jason had a connection to a homicide in February. Are you referring to the homicide of Deshaun Doe?
I didn't say that Jason had a connection. I said he was a person of interest. And subsequently, when we interviewed Mr. Jason Jones, he implicated himself to being on that scene. And that doesn't necessarily make him a suspect. That is a pending investigation. It's an active investigation, and there are still more to learn in regards to that.
Can you tell us the victim?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us the victim?
I believe it was who you stated.
So the officer that was back there, was he the only officer back there?
There were 2 officers in the rear of the residence.
And so it was only one of the officers that fired at Mr. Cordell, right?
That is correct.
Do you know why the other officer didn't fire back?
Well, all of that is part of the investigation, but there are things that would prevent one from firing: distance, certainly the ability to fire that weapon in a safe manner, but all that will be a part of the final investigation when it's completed.
About how many shots were fired?
So what we do know is that the officer involved fired at least 4 rounds.
We see that Jones is facing a robbery first degree charge. What robbery is that?
So this was a robbery. It actually started off as a felony theft second case back in February. And that case really revolved itself around an armed robbery that was not determined at the time. But subsequently, when the investigators got involved, it was determined to be an armed robbery where 2 weapons were stolen from the victim in that case. And of course, when the investigation started, it quickly became a robbery. And then, of course, as it developed so much that the night before the search warrant on March the 6th, the family of that victim had to hide their victim because of death threats coming from the same gang group that Mr. Jason Jones was involved in.
It's so clear on the sequence that the boom device, that was the first thing he did, and then the sirens to alert people in the house came after that?
So when we say breach, there was 2 breaches. There was a breach of the front door, there was a breach of a side door. It happened simultaneously. And from the time that the breach was made, approximately 24 seconds later, was when the gunshots rang out. But you also bring up a good point that approximately 25 seconds was enough time that 6 other occupants, including 1 child, complied with the instructions and came out of the residence. Unfortunately, Mr. Cordell Jones did not, and elected to arm himself with an AR-type pistol that looks like a rifle, leap from a back window, creating and putting himself in danger.
And so would this be considered a no-knock warrant then? And if so, what goes into deciding whether or not to go that way?
So, as you understand, that question has been proposed to the Mobile Police Department certainly since the Breonna Taylor incident. We, at least in my career, as a matter of routine, do not do no-knock search warrants. Nonetheless, the investigator in this case requested a no-knock search warrant as an option when he went to the judge to get the warrant. The SWAT team becoming involved did not elect that option because they have their own strategies and tactics that they use. Because we got a no-knock search warrant doesn't mean we implement it. It just means it's an option that's available if we need it. The option was requested because of the propensity of violence, with Jason Jones certainly being a suspect of an armed robbery, a person of interest on a homicide case, and certainly his affiliation with known gang factions.
But you say it was not exact,
We did not conduct a no-knock search warrant.
but you did do the breach before you announced yourselves as being there?
We knocked, we announced, we breached.
Okay.
And Chief Paul, you spoke about the Breonna Taylor case, in an instance where you want to have transparency in the community. So a lot of people have a lot of questions and want to know if excessive force was in this case. And you tell us you weren't able to share if Cordell, was told to drop the weapon or not. It kind of answers the question of why not releasing the footage to show so that we can see exactly what happened.
Right, because we have to understand we live in an emotionally charged society. The family has yet to have time to process the loss of a child. Now, yes, Cordell is an adult, but he is still somebody's child. And I understand we have to outweigh these type of things versus the need for just the average public to see. But we are not without compassion. I am not without empathy. And having children of my own, I don't know that I would necessarily want that video shown until I've had time to properly process and grieve exactly what's happened.
Can you share your policies and procedures on executing warrants? All the other policies and procedures are on the website except warrants. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, we don't share those because of the tactics and strategies, and that becomes a safety issue for police officers, and there's a reason we do not share that. I'm sorry, John, I really can't hear you.
Where did he experience the gunshot wound? Were there two chassis after that?
Right, so what we can tell you is that Mr. Johnson's body has already been taken to the Department of Forensic Sciences. The preliminary report is he was struck at least 3 times, 2 to the left side of his body, 1 to the left shoulder. And we have no additional information as to right now. We have not received a comprehensive report, but certainly at some point when the Department of Forensic Science reconciles their report and validates it, we will certainly get a copy as far as the investigation is concerned.
Chief, last night we had an officer safety bulletin about Cordell's father wanting to harm police late last night. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Well, what I can tell you is there has been what we call general threats to law enforcement, in particular the Mobile Police Department, as a result of this. I would ask for those certainly affected to have a cool mind, rationale, and to think through what they're doing. We don't need another homicide in any capacity.
Do you know if the AR that Cordell had was stolen?
To my knowledge, it was not stolen. And we don't, and as far as I'm concerned, as far as we're concerned, it's a lawful weapon. Yeah.
If the family requests for that footage to be released, does the department plan to release that footage?
We do not plan on releasing that footage, primarily because the investigation is pending. We have to understand there's 2 things in effect here, a 2-pronged investigation. One is the criminal investigation. That criminal investigation determines whether or not there's any wrongdoing on either Cordell or the officer. There's an administrative investigation that determines specifically if the officer violated any policies of the department. Okay? We would not release that video simply because it has evidentiary value. And I would like to tell you that we would be able to make the decision whether or not this is a justifiable shooting or not. But I don't have that authority. That authority rests solely with the grand jury.
Did you see the video, Chief?
I have.
And you felt that it was justified?
I can tell you that our position is that the officer had the right to implement and use deadly force.
Are you going to release an officer's name?
We will, but not at this time. The officer involved, and certainly other witnesses, other officers, folks in the community, this is still an active, ongoing investigation, and it must be understood there are still interviews that have to be done, and in light of the certainly threats to members of the Mobile Police Department, we will not be releasing that officer's name for his safety, certainly, for some time.
Can you tell us a little bit about him, his background, how long has he been with the force?
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to give you that information right now.
But you are planning to eventually?
Well, my hope would be to, but you know, I don't see it in the foreseeable near future.
Sheriff's office had an officer involved with deputy involved shooting a couple days ago. They released the deputy's name. So I'm just kind of curious why they.
Yeah, well, I just gave you the reasons why I wouldn't, and that's because they maybe didn't have threats toward their deputy that I do toward my officers.
As far as the threats toward the officer, what actions are Mobile Police taking to ensure the safety of officers going forward? Regarding
well, our officers have been put on heightened alert, and they're apprised of the situation. But we don't act with happenstance. We're professionals. We're the premier agency in this part of the country, and we don't act with emotions. We don't act haphazardly. And the officers face this type of danger every single day. And this is no specific threat, but they do face these dangers every single day, including executing search warrants.
And then did you say if Cordell's gun, if that AR-style pistol, if it was loaded?
My understanding, it was loaded. Yes.
The other robbery suspect you spoke about, Christopher Kennedy, is he in custody?
And let me say one more thing about that weapon. There was also a bullet in the chamber as well, and the activator switch was on fire, which means it was ready to be deployed.
Christopher Kennedy, the other suspect, is he in custody?
I do not have that information right now, but he is wanted.
How long do you anticipate these investigations take?
Yeah, these investigations can take some time. A lot of it's just depending on interviewing witnesses, officers corroborating evidence, and we don't always get that information we wanted. But listen, let me say this. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, there you have it, a news conference featuring Mobile Police Chief Paul Prine talking about the incident that happened on Tuesday morning around 6 o'clock, a little after 6 o'clock as a matter of fact, as MPD and SWAT conducting a search warrant at a house on Charles Street that's in between South Broad and Gale, if I remember correctly. And according to him, at that time, Cordell Jones was leaving the back of the house after officers entered the house, after officers, he claims, not only breached the front door, but also breached the side door and then announced their presence. And apparently, as he said, 6 people, including a child, stayed inside the house. One person, Cordell Jones, decided to leave the house out a back window. There were 2 officers in the backyard. And at that point, Jones, according to Chief Prine, was carrying what he calls an AR-15 pistol. Now, it has no stock. It looks like a long pistol, but it is not a pistol. But anyway, he was carrying a pistol. He now tells us it was loaded. There was a round in the chamber, and it was ready to fire. But at that point, once he came out that back window of the house, officers saw the weapon and fired, hitting him at least 3 times, according to Chief Prine. Now, Chief Prine, while sympathizing with the family and empathizing with the family, he made it a very strong point that none of this would have happened if Jason Jones had not been involved in what he calls gang activity, was not a suspect in an armed robbery, and also is a person of interest in a murder. So they were coming for Jason Jones. The search warrant was for Jason Jones. But he over and over again stated that had it not been for the criminal activity of Jason Jones, the alleged criminal activity of Jason Jones, they would not have been there. That the situation might have turned out differently. But he definitely left everything at the feet of Jason Jones. We've got more coming up for you on Fox 10 News at 4 and